Hello. Today we are going to divide a whole number by a fraction. Jane has 2 pieces of pita bread to share with her friends. If she cuts each pita into 1/4, how many pieces of pita will she have to share? So below are her 2 pieces of pita bread, and she wants to cut each into fourths. Again, I'm cutting them as best I can. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total pieces. So if she had 2 pieces of pita bread that she wanted to divide evenly into fourths, she ended up with 8 pieces of pita bread to share with her friends. Brian has 3 yards of string. He needs pieces of string that are 1/2 yard long to make pulleys in science class. If Brian uses all 3 yards of string, how many 1/2 yard pieces will he have? So below are my 3 yards of string, and he wants to cut each of them into 1/2 pieces. So notice I'm cutting each hole into halves. We want to know how many 1/2 yard pieces he has. So he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total pieces. So when he had 3 yards and he divided them into 1/2 yard pieces, he ends up with 6 pieces. So 3 divided by 1/2 is 6. I have 3 pizzas. I want to cut each pizza into thirds. How many slices will I have? So again, I'll try the best I can to draw even pieces. I'm splitting each of my pies into thirds. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 total slices. So 3 divided by 1/3 is 9. Are you starting to notice a pattern yet? 2 chocolate bars will each be cut into fifths. So let's split each into 5 pieces. And we want to know how many total pieces we'll have. We'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 total pieces. So when you start with 2 and you divide it into 1/5 pieces, you end up with more pieces than you began with. So 2 divided by 1/5 is 10. Marissa is baking 5 apple pies. How many people can she serve if each person gets 1/2 of a pie? I have my 5 pies and I'm going to split them in half. You want to think about what your starting amount is. We're starting with 5 apple pies. We're dividing that or splitting that into 1/2 pieces, or pieces that are each 1/2. We end up with 10 total pieces. So now let's talk about the difference between dividing a whole number by a fraction and dividing a fraction by a whole number. So we just talked about dividing a whole number by a fraction. When you have 5 total pieces and your starting amount is 5 and you're dividing them into 1/4 pieces, or 5 divided by 1/4, your answer is counting the amount of fourths there are in 5. So you can ask yourself, how many fourths are in 5? If we count each of the fourths, we end up with 20. Here, if I start with 4 holes and I broke them down to show you each hole, if I split them into thirds, we end up with 12 individual pieces. So our answer is 12. So when you start with a whole number and you divide it by a fraction, you end up with an answer larger than what you began with. On the other hand, if you're dividing a fraction by a whole number, you're starting with the fraction and you're dividing it by a whole number. So here, I started with a third, that's my yellow piece, and I split it into 4 equal pieces. I continued my drawing so you could see how many total pieces are in my whole. Our answer is one of those pieces. Our answer is 1/12. Here, when I started with 1/7, that yellow piece is worth 1/7 of the whole, and I split that into 2 pieces. One of those pieces is worth 1/14 of the whole. So when you start with a fraction and you divide it by a whole number, you end up with an even smaller fraction. The reason being is you're starting with a small amount and you're splitting it up into even smaller pieces in order to divide it out. So you end up with an answer that's smaller than what you began with. So when you divide a whole number by a fraction, which is what's on the left side, your answer is larger than what you began with. If you start with a fraction and you divide it by a whole number, your answer is an even smaller fraction. Some of you might even notice a bigger pattern, noticing that 4 times that denominator of 3 will give you 12. And here, it's a fraction with 7 times 2 as your denominator. The important part is to know what the amount you're starting with. So when you're starting with that whole number, that's the amount you're starting with, and you're dividing it by a fraction, you end up with a whole number. When you start with a fraction and you divide it by a whole number, you end up with a fraction.